Thank you all for coming.
I feel like we should have pipes as well. Would be very nice.
Well, I thought since we're here to talk about influences, that maybe we would start with your most recent books, and you could talk about what the primary influences in those books are, and how you came to them. Katie, do you want to
Sure.
start?
Well, my newest book is My Pretty Vampire, out from Fantagraphics. And I would say the primary influences for that book were the Italian artist Guido Crepeaux, the Italian cartoonist, and the French movie director Jean Rollin, who did a ton of sort of dirty vampire comics in the late 60s, early 70s, all the way up to the 90s until he passed away. And really just sort of like a lot of sleazy European things for the most part, which is kind of how I roll like in general. So yeah, I would say those were the primary things I was looking at.
Were they influences in your work as well? Because I know that there are some of the same themes in Operation Margarine and Nurse.
Yeah, for sure. I've always been interested in things that are like just slightly pornographic, and going and looking at films by Jean Rollin really sort of changed my consciousness, because he's an artist that used pornography so much in his work, but he also used it to make money, to like finance his films. And that to me was really interesting. But I didn't really know about him until I did this Trash Twins podcast with my friend Sarah Horrocks. And so we really looked at his work and, a lot of other European sleazy stuff. So it was always sort of there, but it didn't like metastasize until I got really into him.
What in particular was interesting to you in the way that he used pornography in that sort of double sense?
Most of his films are about vampires, in particular, like pairs of vampire girls, and he would sort of blend like poetry and pornography together. So he was using it as a way to finance the projects, but it still had this like very personal touch to it. He would use things like from his memories from childhood and kind of looking at things from Freud and blending all of that in together. And I just thought that combination was so great, and it breathed so much life into vampire films, because you think vampire films, you think like Twilight or like Only Lovers Left Alive, or like very like sexy things that are like explicitly sexy and they're supposed to be. And Jean Rollin was so awkward and stilted and so like psychological that was something that I really latched onto.
Leslie, maybe this is a good moment to skip down there. The way that Katie's described kind of that mix of qualities and how that appeals to her makes me think of Bright-Eyed at Midnight, which you've described as a diary, and diaries are typically a way of, or a place of working out ideas. And you quote from, I'm blanking on his name. You quote his aphorisms and bits of Jules Renard. Yeah. And so I wonder if that's what you were doing in Bright-Eyed.
Was working out the style?
Well, working out not just the visual style, but ideas and what you thought about things.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the weird thing about that book was that I had started a diary, like a page-a-day diary that I put on Tumblr for a whole year. So I was kind of watching the style develop while it was happening and just like going based on mistakes. But really, like the impetus for that was putting down the pen and having no preconceived notion of what it would look like at the end of the page. So by the end of the book, I had a kind of more concrete style. But at the beginning, it was really like these influences were seeping through, that I try to like music and movies and literature and comics and even like folk art. Like there was kind of this Adolf Wolfe page sometimes, or the Jules Renard, like I'd be reading that halfway through the year and go like, fuck, I gotta do a comic about this. So yeah, but really it was a pushing away of influences in a way, stylistically.
How does it work exactly? I know you said that you try and take in all of the stuff and then you try and forget it, but like how exactly do you...
How
do you do that?
I don't know. I mean, you just kind of shut off your brain a little bit and just kind of see, like, really just see what happens with the materials. You know, just experimenting with them.
What role did the quotes play? Forgetting his name again.
Jules Renard,
Renard.
wrote this diary, and he had this way of summing up kind of a life in the arts in these very witty sentences. And so I kind of dissected my favorites and put them in an order that I thought made a kind of nice little poem, and then I illustrated around that. But I didn't know what the images were going to be until I put I put the quotes on the paper and then just thought about, all right, here's a color that comes to mind or a shape, you know.
Have you found that making that book was beneficial or inspirational or whatever in work that you've done since? Did it free you up in a certain way?
Yeah, definitely. It made me, well, I have a new book coming out in that style in October from Drawn and Quarterly. It's called Present, but it's basically what happened was they were all one page, and then towards the end of the book, they became these longer short stories, maybe 5 pages or 6 pages. So I really liked a 5-page short story for that, and so I did about 40 of those, and then we picked the best for the book that's coming out. So it's definitely kind of, I don't know, it's like a slow incline of learning and learning.
But you had a whole black and white style that you have a whole set of books that are in that style. And so the color stuff, that's what it looked like to me, was color kind of flowing into it.
Yeah, exactly. I did 10 years I did this comic called I, the Majestic Creature, which was that was much more about very concrete influences like hippie comics, Zap comics, 90s Fantagraphics work. I wanted to do my own version of kind of like Hate or 8 Ball and have a series, but unfortunately, like floppy comics, that's what they call them now, you can't really sell them. They don't like to make them. So they put them in volumes of books. So it's kind of funny with that. It's like I set out to do something, and that's not even possible anymore.
And the influence there was with the form, that it's the floppy,
Yeah.
not necessarily like,
Well, the content,
structurally?
like drug comics and stuff like that. I loved, the Freak Brothers and Crumb and stuff like that.
What about color in your work? Because it seems to be, they're very strong, especially in the new book, strong colors.
Thank you. Yeah, my first 2 books were in black and white and at a smaller size. And I was sort of working similar to Leslie, just trying to put things out in issues and mini comics. And it was the easiest form to draw comics in and be able to reproduce them and take them to shows. So that was sort of just by necessity of the form. And now that I have a bigger publisher and a little bit more money, I just want to throw everything that I possibly can into it. And so going color it was really intimidating, but it was also really freeing because I got to just find a whole new mode of expressing, the moods that I wanted to in the comics. And so for this one, I really wanted to tap into palettes from like 70s Giallo films, and I stole a whole bunch of stuff from
Giallo
Argento.
films?
Yeah. Sorry.
Please explain.
So Italian films from the 70s. It was kind of a trend that died out in the 80s, but they're mystery films. They're called Giallo because they're based off this publisher that would always publish mystery novels with like a yellow side. So Giallo is yellow. The side of the books were always yellow. And the films were like Dario Argento and Mario Bava, and Fulci, just like really super saturated, really ketchup heavy, really blood heavy mystery films. And so I just kind of tapped into those sort of palettes. I wanted to kind of recreate that feeling.
Gary, you've got some book on Milton?
What? I'm sorry.
You can't hear me?
No, I couldn't have heard you.
You've got a book on Milton?
My new book is a satire based on Milton's Paradise Regained, and it's kind of the third in a series of books that treat religious writing. It started with Dante. I did a version of Inferno and Purgatory, and then I switched to Milton for Paradise, some sort of Paradise. And I think stylistically, it's probably influenced by this book, is by a lot of crosshatchers from the 1700s and the 1800s, but I really and I have a lot of favorites, but like Tenniel or Nast or Granville, or there's a lot of kinds of cross-hatching, and I'm a fan of that stuff. But I've done all kinds of things, so in a way, the style is always evolving, and it needs to suit the project.
You did the two previous books based on Dante, but you switched to Milton for this one. But I wondered too, why the classics? Why the particular older?
Why I was delving into the classics? Originally, it was because I had named the first collection of Jimbo from a bigger publisher from Pantheon, Jimbo in Paradise. And then I realized, oh no, I've never read Paradise. It's kind of embarrassing to name something without knowing the sources. And I was starting, I'm not very well educated or a good student. And so I took it as an opportunity to do a lot of studying. And Dante was good for me to read as a fucked up Christian, ex-Christian. And because he was a real smart Christian who was making fun of the structures and so on, while not allowing himself to be murdered by the same structures that he was parodying, and also giving a great tool for them to use for propaganda or education purposes. But his interpretation of Christianity is very different from Orthodox or Catholicism, though it's all treated in his work. But the main notion, I guess, in Dante, as I get from it as a stupid Texan, is that there's only love. The uses and misuses of love. Love is the only thing that exists, in essence, in Dante. Milton is in an evolution, and again, from the point of view of a stupid Texan, I did get a research grant at the New York Public Library, so I got to read for a year, study Milton criticism and stuff. And he was a person who was having a spiritual evolution. And so as he matured as a regular, normal human being, he adjusted theology to suit the point he was at in his life, really. Then he got involved in politics, and he got in a lot of trouble for recommending that they kill the king and so on, and then they switched the king on him, and then he was in a lot of trouble. But I think he ended up being the first poet laureate of England, maybe. I think Ben Jonson wanted it, and he got some money, but he didn't get the title. Maybe. But so anyway, I got to do a lot of reading. And in the Purgatory book, I used it as a real opportunity for making this big puzzle that's kind of unreadable. It was like a formalistic exercise, but it's in the foreword. It takes me, it's kind of boring to describe it. It sounds like I'm trying to pretend to be an intellectual or something. But it's like formalistic art. You make it according to rules or some notion you have. And it may reveal the making, and it may determine the making. And so that's what I was doing with that book.
How do you know, because your text in particular, or your book involves a lot of, multiple sources that you can kind of readily identify. So it's you state right on the title page that it's an adaptation of Milton, and you also have the Javanese sort of visual elements in there and other things. How do you know, and this is a question for all of you, how do you know when you're looking at specific sources what you want to use from it and what you don't? Or what you want to use from it, what you want to keep, what you don't, and what your relationship to it is?
That's a great question. I think for me, it's whatever really stands out the most from that work. It's kind of indescribable. It's like the studium versus punctum thing from Barth. It's like whatever pierces you, whatever pierces me, I feel like is the thing that I want to look at more or explore in my own work, or just maybe rip off entirely and try to get away with. But when I look at Guido Crepeaux, who I'm a really big fan of, and he's somebody that his work has been like sort of more and more appreciated here over the years, and so we get to see a lot more. Like, I'm really interested in his style, his black and white style, and I'm interested in how he can go for something that's very sort of like almost over-rendered into something that's really graphic, like on the same page. And so I'll look at something like that, and I'll look at, you know, the way that he draws the female form, because no one draws women like Crepeaux drew women. So kind of study that, or, you know, the way that he does dialogue that's very strange too. So, but like,
What do you think is unique about the way he draws women?
his line work is completely absurd. Like, when you look at it up close, the variation in sort of the thickness of the line, like it's definitely brushwork, but it doesn't look like anybody else's brushwork. And he's great with gravity in his figures. You can feel when a figure is being pulled or thrown around, or, you know, there's an image that I always think of when I think of Crepeaux and the way that he draws the female form, and it's this woman, like, you're looking at her from behind, and she's sitting in a chair like one of these chairs, and she kind of just has her legs like akimbo, but the way that like her pants sit like on her ass basically, like there's nothing else that looks like that. And the way that she's sort of looking out at like the field in front of her, it looks like this is something that she's been doing for like hours at a time. And there's not really, I don't really see that in any other cartoonist's work, you know, that sort of like gravity, and also a sense that this is something that's ongoing. It's not just a panel that happened right here. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, it's whatever pierces you about that particular artist's work is, I think, the thing to go off of.
How do you think how do you think he shows up in your work in particular?
I think the willingness to have his characters go through a lot of physicality. I think the like constant costume changing is something that I'm really into as well. He never had people wear the same thing for the entire comic. Like, sometimes not even the same page. They would change outfits 4, 5, 6 times. I like the confusing elements of his work. I like that he constantly would keep you sort of guessing and wondering, like, am I still reading about the same character, or what time period is this even in? Is this a dream? So I like all of those things for sure.
This is like how we determine what to take and what to not take from our influence.
What you want to use.
In cartooning specifically, if you're making a difficult comic, then all the rules are out the window. But if you're trying to tell a story and take someone somewhere, then you have to do the things that will seduce them, enlist them, get them to go with you, and then not to lose them along the way. And so you want to make everything in the comic contribute to that flow, including the weight of the panels, where the balloons are, the direction the characters are moving, the set dressing. It all has to contribute. The line weights, you know, does the line weight match the emotion? You know, so it's a delicate thing. So of the people that I'm stealing from, I don't know. I guess this kind of bunch is kind of stiff. You know, there's kind of a stiffness in Puck and all that sort of stuff. You know, it's kind of staged, and so I guess I do a lot of comics that are kind of theatrically staged. Someone can be looking at the mountain behind them and looking towards the viewer, you know, like in theater sometimes. And but basically that's it. It's just a matter of what works for the project. But you can get things from different artists. Say like Vanity Fair, William Makepeace Thackeray, right? His shadows are all like, he illustrated the first version of Vanity Fair, and if you get that edition, the character is usually standing close to walls, and there's a shadow that goes to the wall and then up the wall behind them that makes this cupped space, and it happens over and over and over. So there's things like that you can look to from someone, like, oh, that device, that L-shaped shadow that's going to freeze them in a position or something. But you don't want it all. It depends on what you're trying to do.
What about in the very ornate panels in your new book? How are you looking at? Because I know you looked at a lot of visual material when you were at the Coleman Center, and how did you organize all of that in your mind in creating all of the. I'm thinking specifically of all of the circular motifs and the heavily
Well, those
ornate
kind of
stuff.
mandala things, they're really like knitting or crocheting. You know, in a way, you just have to sit there and do it bit by bit, and it's a repetition kind of a thing. I'm going to do all these stars. There's going to be all these knotted things. You have to just sit there and draw it, you know, and slow down for it. And all these things, that's the case. Was there another part to that question? Okay, I got that far with it.
Can I ask you a question, Gary?
Yeah.
So one of the things we haven't talked about yet, but is like humor and like humor influences, because what you did is a satire.
Yeah.
And so like, where do you get, you talk about it from childhood or from, you know, things you like, but where do you get your sense of humor, and how does that apply itself? Is it?
That one's a lot harder.
It is?
It is. I used to stay up late and listen. My bed was in Brownsville, Texas in 1956. There was a wall between my bedroom and the living room where the television was, and there was a gap between the wall and the ceiling, and I would hear my father laughing at the Steve Allen show or the Tennessee Ernie Ford show or something like that. And so I would jump up and down on the bed to look in the gap to see the TV show and to hear my dad laugh. So something like that is already kind of funny.
Good story.
But, and I guess a lot of humor is really, it's like, do you want to cry and scream or do you want to laugh? You know, you can choose. You know, it's that kind of world. It's this world that's fantastic and dangerous. And so humor is this way of sublimating it, I guess, if that's the right word, of manifesting some relief. And so it's a philosophical point of view, really. Am I going to have a giant bummer here? Or, you know, am I going to make some jokes? And so I don't know where it really comes from. A lot of it is, like I've told you, like it's watching these characters and they just do the next thing and say the next thing. And to me, it's like a little movie. And like I've said over and over, because it's true, it's very moving to me when that happens. When I see like the next bit of the story and the characters love each other, cooperate, interact, whatever they do, it moves me. I don't know exactly why. But it's kind of magic. It just you kind of observe it after a while. You got all these balls rolling, you know. They kind of take over.
Leslie, where does your sense of humor come from?
I don't know, like 80s comedies, like Spaceballs and stuff like that. But yeah, I don't know. Like whenever, I think that a lot of, not to get too heavy, but a lot of my sense of humor comes from maybe kind of trying to avoid pain and like take a situation that's painful and kind of find that element of humor in that in order to make yourself feel better and to make other people feel better too. Because sometimes I'll do a comic, like I'm a bartender and I talk to people all day and people tell me their problems. It's a real thing. And, you know, there are themes, you know, it's like there are always themes outside politics and the weather that, you know, your parents and aging and all this stuff. I'm just trying to find these little pockets that's universal to tell my story so that other people can feel a little better in their journey, you know? But I was going to say about humor with you, Katie, is that like the way you draw has this cheeky quality to it. And so I see in the, like, there's always like a kind of like a wink. Like I can imagine Katie drawing at home. She's like, you know what I mean?
That's totally what happens. Yeah. I'm like, this is great. I did it again. I tend to look at sort of like 60s B movies for that like sense of humor. Like I'm a big Russ Meyer fan, and you just have to respect a guy who dedicated his life to one thing and but found a way to still make art that was transgressive and also so funny. Faster Pussycat Kill Kill is so funny. And so yeah, I do think I have like a cheeky sort of sense of humor about it. But I think the humor that I like really like and respond to in my life is just like so mean-spirited and terrible. Like I don't even want to talk, like I love like Howard Stern. I'm just like, I like rude, like horrible stuff. Sorry.
I feel like with each of your work, there's this tension. Well, when you mentioned B movies, and it's a lot of the stuff that I kind of grew up on too, and movies like Spaceballs, where they're simultaneously asked to be gullible, but also to be skeptical about what it is you're seeing. And I think that tension, which is a very theatrical kind of tension, is an interesting one. And I think it's true of pulp horror that you were seeing, like the ketchup or the sort of splashes of blood, and knowing it's not real, but also having to invest yourself in it. Do you think there are working with sort of tropes that are so recognizable? Is there a challenge to that, or a danger in working with it?
I think there's definitely a danger in thinking, okay, here are all of the tropes, and I've lined them all up, and I knocked them all down, and so my job is done. My job in this particular genre is done. It's not really done. I mean, it could be if you just wanted to accomplish that. But for me, I would like to kind of take all of that and internalize it and put it back out as something that's original and different, and that's mine. That's like inherently mine, my vision. So, yeah, I think that can definitely be tricky. But you also want to kind of take those symbols and have fun with them. So for like a good part of the book, I chose to just make the blood black. Like, why not? You know, like, why not look at something like that? And also, you know, I was sort of trained in thinking like black and white comics. And so to do that and then just kind of suddenly shift it for like no real reason later in the book to red, I think is kind of like a fun nod to like a genre land sort of like twist that he would do in one of his movies. It's like, why did this happen? It's like, it has its own like poetic reason. You don't need to know, you know? So I hope that's not annoying to people.
I think it's cool, and like your universe has its own internal logic, you know, and you're just kind of like, that's the way it is, because we don't understand anything about the world, in my opinion. I mean, a little bit, but
Thank you.
So when I'm going through life, I'm always just like, why is this and why is it? I don't know, but I just have to accept it.
Will you go on
Think about
Goodreads
it.
and say that to anybody who doesn't
what?
like? Will you go on Goodreads and say that?
Sure,
to
yeah,
Thank
exactly.
you.
No
Appreciate
problem.
that.
Listen, man.
Gary, you simplified Milton's book. You say you simplified.
Yes, I simplified Milton. Yeah,
Well, you simplified the language.
right.
The story, as you say, is in itself is much more straightforward. But what did you? What was the reason for that? Did you feel like it was just the story that you sort of you simplified this? Well, his language, for one, in your book is less verbose, but also I guess the story itself is fairly streamlined.
There's hardly anything there. In the Bible, there's hardly anything there. I mean, the main thing is that he flies them to the top of the mountain and they look down, you know. Then he flies them to the peak of the temple and threatens to leave him on the temple, you know. And otherwise, they're just standing around arguing, carrying on separate conversations, really, you know. So there's some humor in that, of people not talking to each other. And I was playing, not like making fun of Milton. That was one thing. It's not a satire, really, of Milton. He's the victim in that I've gotten a hold of him in a way. But it's really to try to educate myself more and to try to, you know, I was trying to be... Purgatory was a really unfun book. It's not a book you can read. You can look at it, you can look around at it. And so I've done a lot of these difficult books, and I thought, you know, I should tell a story, you know. So telling a story is a different kind of challenge. It's a big challenge. And if people, and I don't care what people think very much, but I'll say, you know, if you just kept doing difficult projects, people would go like, well, you can only do difficult, you can only make difficult stuff no one wants to see, you know. And again, I guess getting older, I'm just more emotional. I'm more like invested in humanity. I don't know, in animal cooperation. I really like the videos where like animals like each other on, that they shouldn't. The shark teams up with a minnow, and they go have a drink or something. Or when, humans like get a whale out of that's wrapped up in saran wrap for some reason, and they fix it. That's what's driving my stories these days is animal-human cooperation.
Yeah, I got a sense. Well, I haven't gotten your book yet because it's just come out. But I follow you and read snippets and read your book, of course. But there's both of them seem like a big influence. Was just like it seems like it would be fun to inhabit this story, and the way you use color. It seems like that's fun for you to play with that, and the way you design your characters. Songy's a funny-looking dude.
He's already funny.
Yeah, he's already funny.
That was a thing. I mean, I didn't learn this, but it was definitely a thing Matt Groening was adamant about. Was he always wanted his stuff to be funny before you start reading it. It's got to already look funny. And also, if you know Matt, which everyone knows Matt to a certain extent, he starts laughing before he tells you the joke. And it's not because he's an insincere creep. It's because he's really going to tell you something that's funny. But it's all about, getting you to go there with them too. So I don't know. Yeah, we're going to spend the years doing these things. So it's got to be satisfying. It's got to scratch some itch you have to do this sort of thing. And we're typically damaged people. I mean, artists are damaged. They're operating out of catastrophe and neglect and all kinds of things like that. And so we're pathetic wretches. But we have a lot of fun. We turn it all into great fun, good cheer, aphorisms that could be helpful or not. But, I mean, I don't know. But I think I do have a lot of fun. That's got to say. And this, another thing I will say is an advertisement for the analog, because I'm not a computer person, and I appreciate everything that everyone's doing to preserve tools to draw with, the humanity you get from touching dirt and sweeping the floor and doing all those kinds of things are something to preserve now. And I've said this over and over, but when Art and Francois started Raw Magazine, they only found about 8 or 10 people in the country that were drawing stuff that was interesting to them. And I don't know if they started Raw today, they would have 80,000 people to choose from. They're going to choose more than 8 people out of 80,000 people. I mean, it's this amazing culture of drawers that didn't exist 20 years ago. I don't think it existed. And I'm for it. It has my vote.
Do you think there are more people, more interesting drawers today than there were then? Or
Yeah,
just
I
that you
think-
can see them?
Yeah, I think I don't know. There was a lot of hippie drawers that they were going to draw one thing maybe. It's the last thing I'm ever going to draw. I'm going to put everything on this piece of paper. I'm done, okay? But everyone now, they're lifers. People in this generation, they're drawing hundreds of thousands of hours. And if you run into them at a bar and they're scribbling, you go oh my God. They've drawn hundreds of thousands. They're drawing a flower, but you can tell they've drawn hundreds of thousands of hours, and that's an admirable, interesting way to spend your time, I think.
Is that true, Katie and Leslie?
I think so. I don't know that I'm not really drawing in a bar, but I think everything else is true. In a way, it's intimidating to me because I didn't study comics. You can go to school and study comics now. I didn't do that. I didn't study fine art or anything. I studied art history. And so I'm always so nervous about seeing what's coming out of SVA and everything now. I'm these kids can really draw. I'm out of business. I'm done, But I think having life experience and time and everything is going to inform the work so much more. It's great to have that set of drafting skills for sure, but if you don't really have any experience to inform what you're doing, it's not going to be interesting to me. So yeah, I think I don't know. I do tend to draw the same things over and over and over, and you kind of have to as a cartoonist. But yeah, I do think that that's like intrinsic to me as a person. Do you feel that way, Leslie?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, like the word talent to me always kind of upset me because it means like something you were born with. And I'm sure that there's some element of that, but I tend to think my favorite artists and the people that I most respect are people who have good taste and then work really hard, you know? Because it's like I could sit here and draw you guys exactly how you look and not have an idea for anything, you know, and have no ideas, or it'd be facile or whatever. So what you were saying about like there's tons and tons of drawers now and they're all doing it, like yeah, they're all lifers, but there's also this thing happening where people think they can make a career in comics. And they have this really you know, they think like, I remember thinking when I first got published, I'm like, this is it. Like, I'm not going to have to work anymore and stuff like this. Like no one bought that comic, like, you know, but, so I think there are people who get into it for that sometimes, but
Maybe it's just a wish. No, you're saying that they think it's a career.
yeah. I think so.
Wow.
Don't you think so, Katie? There are people
That's so
who have
sad.
unrealistic expectations. Yeah.
I do think so. But most of the cartoonists that I know have a side gig.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think they're dissuaded of that pretty quickly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Leslie, when you started the drawings that went into Bright Eyed, you were putting them up on Tumblr, and I know you said that you were initially reticent to do that. Was part of that feeling like you were joining this group of people who were publishing online as a way of, I don't know,
Getting attention just to get attention. Yeah.
or trying to start some sort of career in some
Yeah.
way?
I mean, I switched what I try to do if I see, so I'm looking at Tumblr and I'm like, okay, I don't like this. How can I find like the good aspects of it? And I was thinking, well, it's like, I was very influenced by strips in the paper as a kid, and I'm thinking like that was a restriction. They had to be a certain size and blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, on Tumblr, like it works if there's like one image or you can read a whole comic. Because before I was doing these long form comics and I just put up like snippets of them, and I was like, that's not satisfying for everyone. And it makes me feel weird because I'm just trying to get attention for this other thing on this platform. So why don't I use this platform as sharing instead of just thinking of it as like, advertising?
I know there's sort of a divide with, using Tumblr as the example, but going back to influences, that now there's this a sort of unending wealth of visual material at your fingertips at any given moment. And some people think that that's great because it gives, instead of, never having access to something or discovering it late, that it's right there, and things that you never would have discovered. And then on the other hand, it's a flood. So how do you find yourself sort of on one or the other side?
I feel I kind of miss the preciousness of the effort of finding things. Going to like I would go to the comic store. I'm kind of weird for my generation because I didn't really even have a computer till I was like out of college. But I would go to the comic store every week and I'd go through the dollar bins, and there's so much garbage even, in that. So it's like, but I'd find the one thing, and it was just this treasure, and it was this connection I had with this creator against all odds, and that, to me, I miss that,
What about you, Gary? Because you've always pulled from kind of all over the place, and that's...
I'm from that generation. I'm from that generation. I use the mic. I'm from the generation. I'm from that stupid generation that we had to extrapolate from tiny little fragments. And so you went to the library and you looked through everything in the whole library, every book in the whole college library that had a picture in it, looking for stuff, And then you found like Idea Magazine and Twin Magazine, and you found all these things from other countries, and you might find an artist you would never see again that might change your life or change your imagination. And so that was kind of that quest, was to find fragments And then guess what that whole world was, because you're never going to get to see the rest of that person's work. So then you had to use your imagination. And so then it could become an influence because you didn't really have the whole thing. You had to imagine what this, well, Keiichi Tanaami, he was like a poster artist who's got some purchase now. He did in the 60s as well, but he was kind of lost to time. And I used to see his work tiny, and it would blow my mind, but then I wouldn't see it again for 30 years, you know. But then you fuck up your antenna so sensitive that I was in Tokyo and I was walking down the street and I saw this building that said 360 and I went, oh, 360. I did a silk screen with a guy named 360 25 years ago. I'm going to go in. And I went in and he was there, but he didn't remember me. But he started publishing Keiichi Tanaami books. So by just like having your radar really fine-tuned, it will lead you to that stuff. It's like Savage Pencil, you know, Savage Pencil. You go into a record store and he sees this thing at the top of the shelf, top shelf. He goes, what's that, you know? And they pull it down and it's like a handmade discography of Sun Ra records, you know? So he's like somehow can look in this whole room and go like, what's that thing? And find it, you know? And if you're looking on a computer or you're looking at the library, it's the same thing. I think it's the same. Curiosity is what's essential.
Yeah, and not to sound too curmudgeonly about it, because I do think there's like wonderful things about like, you know, let's say I'm interested in artists and I can just Google image search and just find everything, you know, like I love that too. But yeah, it just seems a little bit more, I don't know. I still miss that magic. There's something magical. I think what your story about being in Tokyo is like that's.
And then people can find the thing. Like, okay, so my friend's not here right now. Okay. So I look for these incredibly obscure Mexican movie stills, and I paint paintings from them. And I don't want you to know, you know, it's like, oh, that's the movie, you know. And so I look through thousands of these things on eBay, and I find, oh, this is like so vague. No one's going to, you know, no one. And then I paint the thing. Then my friend runs it through an image search. Oh, that's from, you know, and in like 1 second, they undid all those like nights spent looking through, you know, thousands of things to try to find something hidden. I have a hard time hiding things. We used to find porn in the woods, under a log. That's where you could find it, in the crook of a tree, which sexualized the crooks of trees, actually. But anyway.
And Katie, I was going to ask you about, like, I've noticed you're starting to color, like you do coloring on the computer, but you're also doing more like pencil and.
Yeah, I have started.
Like,
oh, I'm sorry.
How do you feel about the different? Yeah.
Well, I think I'll always draw by hand, just because I tried using like a Cintiq once and just I pressed it too hard, and like the person that owned it got really mad, and I just don't need that kind of pressure in my life. And so I feel really comfortable coloring digitally. And I think for the kind of like influences that I want to express, that's been the best, because you know, you can make something look like Guy Panter, like a 60s Belgian comic, very easily digitally. And if you want to color like Suspiria, you can do that very easily, because you can just bring up a still from it and just sample colors and steal that way. But I have started to do more like hand coloring, and I've been using markers more and trying to get things to look sort of more like watercolor, but also like a little bit expressionist too. And that's been really fun. The challenge now is getting that to reproduce correctly when I scan it. That's like a major hassle. But that's been really fun, and it does feel a lot more personal. It feels like there's a lot more me in the work, and I've become less afraid to be more present in my own work, I think. So that's definitely something that I want to explore. If I can do it for like 300 pages, though, is kind of a different story. So it's easier for me to try that out with shorter comics.
Maybe we should open up to questions from the audience. Any questions?
I have one. I'll just speak loud. When we were talking about communications of influences, I would say July 2017 is very different than July 2016 was. as somebody mentioned, you work on these for a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. So everybody was probably finishing things up in the last year. Did you find that this socio-political upheaval, bizarre land that we lived in, was that influencing your work in the last year, or would you, somebody else said you kind of tuned things out. When you tune back in as the work was done, did you see anything in it or take something from it that you may not have seen before?
I think getting started in a project that's going to take, for me, that's going to take like 2 years, you kind of get a sense of, not like a psychic sense, but you can kind of like take the temperature of what's going on in the world. And I think for the last 3 books that I've done, you see the optimism from them sort of slowly fade out. And that happened in this particular moment, I don't really think is a coincidence. I'm not saying I predicted everything that's going on right now. But I think a lot of that comes from the fact that, like, you know, I'm getting older in this time period, and, you know, I've been part of like the workforce for 10 years, and dreams have kind of shifted or maybe faded, and so yeah, you kind of can't help but, for me, I kind of can't help but get that like barometer read in what I'm doing. But I don't feel like I'm someone that would ever be qualified to like commentate on it directly. I kind of have to like subvert it through everything that I'm doing.
Actually, I'm curious. Well, you say you wouldn't comment on it directly, but how does, I mean, a lot of your work has, with regard to sort of gender, you've got really strong female characters who are doing kind of literally whatever they want to do in some cases, and the male characters are not, they're not there a whole lot.
Yeah, I don't get to have like as much agency as I'd like to have in my own life. I would, you know, I get mad on the E train and I want to like bite people and stuff, but I can't do that. So I try to funnel that into the work. But for me, I don't find, men are just sort of like absent from my own life in this particular way, that I wouldn't really include them because they're not really something that's like part of my consciousness all the time. But women are. I know a lot of, you know, really strong women, and most of my role models, you know, who I look up to are women. And I know I talk a lot about like influences that are male, but the people that are directly, you know, affecting me in my life on a day-to-day basis are the women that I know. And so I want to write characters that they can maybe see themselves in, or see their sort of struggles in, and relate to them in that way. And I kind of think women are just more interesting, like inherently. I'm sorry.
So I draw comics for Vice.com. So I did weekly for 6 months over the time where we saw Trump win. And I had, it directly changed the kind of content I was putting out there in a lot of different ways. The first was just writing about, because I do bartend, I had to work the day after the election in a bar and see everyone's reactions. And my first customers of the day were supporters. I just wanted to stay in bed and cry all day like everybody else. But I had to go, I put on Stevie Wonder all day. I put a peace sign and flowers on the chalkboard, and I talked to all these people. There were people coming into the neighborhood, this is Park Slope, Brooklyn, that I don't think had been in a bar for years, just wandering in like, what do I do? I'm like, I'm gonna help you through this. We're gonna get someone good to drink. So I drew a comic about that, and I put that up the next week, and so I got a lot of comments about that, and talking to people, and especially, and my comics have always been about kindness and accepting who you are and who other people are. And it's even got bumped up now where it's like, I really want that to be, I think we really need more of that. So.
Kindness. For me, I guess there's a psychic quotient in this, if that's the right word, in making comics somehow. It seems to line up with things mysteriously and irritatingly and creepily. And so this Milton book is really about the seduction of power and fame and riches and fortune and all of that junk, and the rejection of it for something simpler and finally simple human companionship at the end of the book. I mean, that's the punchline of the thing. So that was going on for 5 years before this happened. And so I think that if your antennas are up, then you'll reflect what's going on somehow. And I refuse to draw Trump. I'm not going to be in the books with pictures of Trump. I could draw really ugly pictures of him, but I'm not sure they'd be effective. And I haven't seen anyone come forth, to my satisfaction, to make political cartoons to match the situation. There's a lot of beautiful cartoons, there's a lot of skillful cartoons, there's a lot of wonderful metaphors, but there's nothing like Ralph Steadman or Gerald Scarfe or those guys that could like massacre on the level that needs to happen in this situation. And so I just make stupid bumper stickers, slogans, and put them up on Facebook in the morning after I read the news, and that's it for me. But definitely I think we're all hypersensitive to this stuff. And I think, leaning on the balance towards empathy and kindness and care is a simple way to combat this scene, which God knows where it's going to end. I mean, the only thing that people confusedly say is like, something is going to happen. Something is going to happen, but God knows we don't know really what it is yet. And I hope nothing happens, but something happens. Something always happens.
Well, I'll try again too. I know you said you started studying art history, and Gary, before there was raw. I'm not sure how you expect some of those comics to be published, or when you. So my question is, how did you come to be a comic book artist or cartoonist? Were you like drawing comics as teens just for yourself and thinking? When did you feel like, oh yeah, I really can publish this?
I always liked comics, and my dad could draw. He was a painter, and so I wanted to be a painter, and I studied painting. And when I entered painting school, pop art was happening, and I'd grown up in a dime store, so it was familiar to me. I was still studying pop art. I'm still interested in that. So, but comics, I got excited about hippie comics. And then I remembered the comics I liked as a child, like Jesse Marsh and some people that I got stuck on when I was a child. And so I started I went to Yale Summer School of Music and Art in Norfolk, and I was starting to try to learn how to ink comics and stuff there, and they let me goof around. So I just found my way, really. I didn't know like how big you drew, that you could erase pencil out from under the ink. I didn't know any of that stuff, It took me a long time to learn that simple stuff. So, you find your way. And again, if you go to art schools, they're full of people that they're stuck. That's all they can do. They can't do math. They can't make change. They can't, sell a vacuum cleaner. They've got to do this one way or the other, and so you find your way. Or die a horrible death.
I had always been drawing, and my father owns a newsstand in Pennsylvania where I'm from, and so he would bring comics home for me, and I would read them, and then I graduated to working at the newsstand, and I would sell them, and in addition to like really just like the nastiest skin rags, like I can't even believe that they're like published, so those wires got like really crossed for me. But I was always drawing, and it just seemed like, comics kind of helped me learn how to read, and I was like, this just seems like such a natural mode of expression for me. And I would start putting my own like little books together, and I would cut things out of catalogs, like when I couldn't draw it. I was like, I can't draw a horse, so I'll cut it out and like paste it in there and like just figure it out that way. And so it wasn't really until college that, my school, I went to Syracuse University, they have a daily newspaper, and they have a comic strip page. And because they publish daily, and it's like a college newspaper, they were just desperate for anything they could get, and I started submitting stuff, and it was so bad. But they couldn't say no because I wasn't getting paid, and they needed it. And so that was really kind of what like took off. I really liked being on that schedule. I liked having to produce stuff, and I liked seeing it in print. And then started making mini comics and going to shows, and yeah, just went from there.
Yeah, I was really influenced. When I was a kid, I started making comics, I think, when I was like 4 years old, just strips. And then I'd put it away for a while, and I started another one when I was 7 called like Simon the Spaceman or something, you know. And then I started one when I was 13 called, these were all strips in different notebooks, called Leslie, and it was just me, like in gym class, and like the balls would be coming at me, and like I'd be running away, or like I had this like magical bird and a magical bunny, and they helped me in like class if I was like stuck. And so it was basically the world I wanted to inhabit then. But then I got really into punk rock when I was like 14, and I was like, oh, comics are for kids, and I'd never seen any. It's true. And I would just do these like skull and like naked lady drawings and like try to be really like aggressive. And then then I found like Charles Burns, you know, it's one of the first of the, you know, I guess indie comics or alternative comics, call them. And I was like, oh, it's dark and it's a comic and it's for adults and it's beautifully drawn. And I can't believe one single person did all this work. It seemed completely insane to me. It is insane. But so then right after that happened, I was 17. It was just like I hit the floor running and just never gave up.
There's something really great about seeing your comic blowing down the street. It's kind of a fantastic thing. If you're in a tabloid or something and then you're like walking along like, oh, there goes my comic.
Oh, yeah.
I must exist.
You've made it. So was Charles Burns, like, that was the big one for you, Leslie? Which book?
Charles and like Dan Clowes and like R. Crumb and were my favorites. So
Did you have like a big book, Gary? That like,
I'm sorry.
did you have like a big book, like your first comic that like influenced you to make them?
In college. It was college. And it was at that moment in the 70s when hippie comics were breaking boundaries. It's hard maybe to explain to young people like why these vile comics were so important. Ugly, vile comics. And so all the young people that joined up like me, we were trying to make them more vile than S. Clay Wilson. And it was hard. And so I made some really vile comics.
wasn't one called P-Dog?
Well, that was later. That's when I should have known better. Yeah, I'd worked on the dirtiest comic in history, I would say. But I blame my friend Jay. It was really his comic. But no, early on, I mean, I did comics that are not published. And I did, in that, Matt Groening published a bunch of my early stuff, and I published some stuff that was real early. It was kind of gross. And I just had this idea of like, you know, I promised myself when I grew up, I'm going to stand by my younger self, you know, and I'll like, you know, and this stuff gets published, and it's like, why did I stand by that kid? He was a fucking idiot, you know. But, you know, you keep your promises.
Yeah, I feel really strange because they're like my first book that came out, I was around 28, and but I'd started it when I was 22. So that work had, because it was a series, had to go in the first book. It's like where it started, and there's just some stuff I'm terribly embarrassed about. And I feel like there's some artists that, you know, they come into comics through different avenues, through painting, through illustration, and you can see it a lot in their work and how they're telling the story, whether it's in using mostly narration or they're using the character and postures, and there's just all different ways you can go about it. Really cartooning, reading images, which is a different skill set than just illustrating a story. So where's I going with this? Oh yeah, so I was really embarrassed for like, like some of my work really embarrasses me, and I had at some points had wished that I had come from like, I've been illustrating for like 15 years, and this is my first comic, and I just like every panel is perfect. But yeah. I think that there's someone told me this when I was talking to them, and they're very smart, to say like, some of your favorite artists, what was their period of time of work that you most respond to? And it's that time when they're figuring it out, and not everything's perfect yet.
True.
Yeah.
One kind of a weird thing. do stuff? How does it affect what you do if you do?
I tend to listen to things that are like more rhythm focused or instrumental. I pretty much listen to the same like Khan album over and over, and I just find that it really focuses me because that drummer was such a manimal. It was Egg Bamyasi, so I just go to that one over and over. He did, R.I.P. Jackie, yeah.
I listen to LPs, and now I have a shelf, and they're all on shelves now, and I bring them to the room, and I put them on, and then I space out, and then I turn them over, and I hear the first few measures, and then I space out, and I turn them over, and I go look for another record and put it on. But I get to make music now, which is the greatest thing, is having this component in my life where I get to like make music with people, because I was raised in a religion where we couldn't play instruments or dance and have fun. And so now I don't dance, but I have fun. And so getting to make music is great. And it's psychedelic music, which is what I mostly listen to anyways, 60s psychedelic stuff or post-punk. And it's a joy.
I also play music and I play guitar. Yeah, I actually, for a long time, I didn't listen to music while I was drawing. I listened to books, like Larry McMurtry books that were like 36 hours long, so that I didn't have to get up and flip the LP. But actually, right now, I've had this really nice meditative, I don't know, how would you say a circle? What are the circles? They're meditations to music. I just like make a circle template, and then inside the circle, I'll do watercolors to music.
Oh, you're talking about your art, but there's music that goes with it.
Yeah, so I'll put something like I'm on Instagram, and I'll put like the circle up, and I'll write like this band's called $75 Bella, and this is the record that this song is. And because when I hear, I don't think I'm synesthetic, but like there are certain like chords that I hear that it just seems like that's. A minor chord would be like a dark color.
Right.
It's not like.
But is it $75 Bill?
Yeah.
Is that's the name of the band? I don't know.
You're gonna love them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. I'll listen to them. They make LPs?
They do.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much.